Okay, so let's get into it. This is my Vision Tech project for the past 4 weeks or whatever it's been. And as you've read in the description and in the title, it has been over Xcode and making apps. New to this, but I'm going to show you how it's done. So, when you open up an Xcode project, it's going to look something like this, minus these two things. Um, and so it's going to be a blank sheet, and you have to add some stuff to it. So, where do you add them from? You go to the library. So, a quick way to get to the library is Command Shift L, and it'll appear here. It's kind of just this drag and drop thing. I set it over here because it looks nice over here. And you can search whatever you want. So for me, I am going to use a label, and a label just looks like that, and it can become that. So here's a label right here. I've drug it in here. I've edited the name, which is right here, and I've changed the many attributes that make it look how it looks now. And I'll open up the library again, and I can use a button. And there's my friends in the background. And so here's the button here, and I've changed some other attributes about this, as you can see. And all these attributes can be changed within this, which is called the view controller. But what happens when you click a button? Well, that's where we go into the view controller. So this is kind of where the code goes. And if I open up a file, we're going to go to swipe. This is a file that I used to go from one screen to another. I believe this, either if this one works, we'll see. And if it doesn't, oh, there we go. It does work. So it says swipe right to see a surprise. So when you swipe right, it goes to this extra long deal, and you can scroll down on it, and it says, "Nice work, dude." So let's take a look at how that works. Actually, that's going to take a little bit. So I'll show you how that works. When you go to the view controller, there's a few things that have to happen. There is a function that it's a swipe recognizer, so it just means that it detects a swipe, and then there is a direction in which it swipes. Oh, here we go. Here, it's finally loaded. And as soon as that loads up. So it detects that it's swiping in a direction, and it tells that direction which way to go. And we'll see that. So it says swipe right to see a surprise. And so now it says scroll down. So I have to click and drag just because that's how it works. And it says, "Nice work, dude." So that is another deal. And that's all because of a little bit of code in the background. So when you kind of go into an app that you use regularly, maybe it be social media, Snapchat is a good example. When you swipe to the right or to the left, that's a swipe gesture that it's recognizing and using to go to another storyboard, which is one of these things right here, or view controller, but it's also got a little visual bit here. And so that is kind of what's going on underneath. So let's move into assets. There's a great tutorial that I followed, which I believe it's this one, and it has a lot of resources in it, so I'd want to use it. And they're not loaded in yet, so we're going to have to find them. And as you can see, it's kind of like a card game. I think it's called War. And if it'll load, there we are. So this one has a lot of buttons and labels and pictures even, and all of them combine to create delete that. All of them combine to create this, and we'll look at that in a second as soon as it loads. So let's look in the background a little bit. For this one, it has a button. See, it says it's an outlet for an area. So an outlet is kind of like what happens when a button is pressed. It's like it's an action. It's a place where an action can take place. And then there's an action right down here, which is what happens when a button is pressed. So here, this is finally loaded up. We'll see that in a second. Click deal, and the card changes. And it's not really we know that it's a random number, which is deal tap, left number, which is this, and this is right number, which is what we were referring to, and that is, it generates a number, and it calls up the asset's name of this asset. And so each of these have a name. This one's called card 8, card 5, and all that. And so that's how that works. So if you enjoy consistency and reasoning behind something, I would say that this type of coding is pretty good, because there's a lot of visual to it too. Swift is a Objective-C language, but it's very good about kind of helping you along. And I believe that's kind of Xcode too, but Xcode kind of fills in some of the things that it thinks you're trying to do. And so that is nice. But what is hard about using Xcode is every so often they update it, and they update the Swift language, and I'm talking about Apple here. And so the tough part about that is as you update things get different, and when you try to view a tutorial, it's not going to be the same every time. And that's not to say that you can't figure it out. It's just sometimes frustrating when you're following, this guy or girl doing the tutorial, and it just doesn't work out. So as for tutorials, I have them linked down in the description of what I used. Very, very useful stuff. And if you follow the tutorial he made, you can make this little war app right here. And in the process, you can learn quite a bit about what Xcode can do and how to use it. So I would say that I learned quite a bit from this project. If you do plan on going into Xcode, I would say watch tutorials and work along with it, but pull them together. Make a project of your own. Don't get too deep, because there's a lot going on here, and it can be really overwhelming. And that's why I would say go for a tutorial first. Don't just try to dive in. If you have a coding background, you kind of know a little bit of this. I know a lot about functions and variables, and just kind of how that works. But if you don't be afraid to take the time to learn about that stuff. And it's well worth your time if you do.